I believe that sometimes the process of getting to a destination is probably and likely more important than the destination itself. And I think the same thing applies to this word that we are increasingly using, which is reconciliation. I mean, I think it's somewhat of an overused word, and in its overuse, there are many different meanings that people ascribe to the word reconciliation, and some people are offended by the word reconciliation in terms of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The Webster or the dictionary definition of reconciliation means getting back to a proper relationship. Well, for Indigenous peoples in this country, there was never a proper relationship with non-Indigenous peoples. But my experience in government and the reality of how change happens, how we can be on that path in a really constructive way to create constructive change towards reconciliation. This change, like change from the status quo or deconstructing our colonial legacy and creating proper relations between and among people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, does not happen by changes that the Prime Minister or premiers or leaders make in terms of changing laws and policies, although that's important. What I've experienced and what in terms of reconciliation, but more broadly than that, social change generally, is that it happens, how I like to call it, like a thief in the night. It happens by, and change is made and we wake up one day and realize that something has changed. How did that come to pass? It's by individuals in their own lives and their own realities, having discussions and realizing that there is injustice or something needs to change and then acting upon it. That's how social change, in my view, and the history book shows this, has changed over time. It's not by a politician necessarily with a stroke of a pen changing the law or a policy that makes that change happen. And for me, I've witnessed more and more in my life and throughout the roles that I've played, it's Canadians that are increasingly being more interested in reconciliation, but not just interested in it, wanting to understand it and wanting to know what their part is in it, not to be bystanders necessarily, or allies, which is important. But for me, allies means that you just sit and you watch and you support. We need what my sister calls like accomplices, or what I like to call in-betweeners, people that are going to get involved to break down the silos that exist between and among us. And we're on that path. There is some constructive change happening. And we just need to continue to build on that constructive change. And, the roles that we have to play in reconciliation as individuals and collectively as governments and as Indigenous nations, they're all different, but we all need to ensure that we get our own houses in order and recognize the roles that we play. For governments, it's to change laws, policies, and practices and understand that relationship to deconstruct that colonial reality that exists. For Indigenous peoples in this country, and we're seeing more and more success, it's rebuilding their nations and being self-determining, including self-governing. And for Canadians generally, which is, I'm so optimistic about our futures, people are becoming more educating themselves about our history. The history that we've generally, you and I read in the history books, is not reflective of the voices of the many. It's reflective of the voices of the few. We need to, as Canadians, understand our true history. And that means going back and understanding that there were voices that were muted and have been muted for so long, and understanding the different experiences and learning about them. And then when we learn and understand, then we can act and be agents of change and in-betweeners for reconciliation.